Second only to the state of Alaska in navigable waterways, the Bluegrass State's intimate connection with its lakes, streams, and rivers is well documented. From legends of exploration by historic figures like Daniel Boone and Abraham Lincoln to the seasonal tourism brought to Kentucky in more modern times, water is as important to the Commonwealth as horse racing or bourbon. As we have discussed countless times on MIK, running water seems to be a major factor in many paranormal encounters and supernatural experiences, and an attractor of different types of phenomena. While dogmen stalk the banks of the land between the lakes and Mothman beats its wings along the surface of the Ohio River, what unknown entities and unfathomable creatures lurk in the depths of Kentucky's waters? Come along as we plunge the murky bluegrass waters in search of the monsters that may call them home. From Harry the Herrington Lake Monster, a supposed pig-eel creature, and the Lake Linville Monster, described by some witnesses as a large black slug released into the lake by machine gun toting G-men, to a Nessie-like serpent said to make the Ohio River near Henderson, Kentucky its home, and an unnaturally gigantic specimens of Catfish and Alligator Gar, we've drugged the waters in search of them all. Tonight, Midnight in Kentucky is your personal guide on this full moonlit tour through the unusually unnatural inhabitants of the Bluegrass Cryptid Aquarium. Welcome to Kentucky.
The birthplace of Abraham Lincoln and built on the largest cave system in the known world. The home of Daniel Boone, Hunter S. Thompson, horse racing, and bourbon.
But when the hour grows late, the Bluegrass State becomes the breeding ground for realms beyond those familiar to the human race. In the east, ghosts, spirits, and ethereal entities roam the hills and hollers.
In the north, Mothman beats his wings along the banks of the Ohio River.
To the west, small green creatures stalk farmhouses and disappear without a trace when shot.
While in the south, the energy of the Belled Witch is palpable just over the border. Joining with us as we investigate just what goes on in the Bluegrass night.
And ask the question, how many coincidences are too many? There's no need to check the clock.
There's no need to check the clock. Time is an illusion.
Time is an illusion.
And it's midnight.
It's midnight. In Kentucky.
In Kentucky.
In Kentucky. In Kentucky. In Kentucky. In Kentucky. Night owls of all times, places, spaces, and ages, the full moon has risen once again, and for Midnight in Kentucky, I'm Ben.
And I'm John.
As always, if you enjoy the show, please leave us those good ratings and reviews. Those go a long, long, long way in getting us new listeners and getting new people to check out the weirdness that we're doing here. You can leave those on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, and now on Spotify. And if you check any of those, we are in the 4.5 to 5 star review territory. Yeah. So motherfuckers don't be coming with that 2.5 shit. Take that shit somewhere else. No, we appreciate all of those. Any of those that you give us, we will be happy with. But for real, keep it like 4 to 5 stars. And as always, if you enjoy the weirdness you're hearing on the show, check us out online at midnightinkentucky.com, the Midnight in Kentucky Facebook page, Twitter, and the Ransom Letter Publishing YouTube channel. Hopefully by the time you're hearing this, I've had some time to get up some Midnight in Kentucky classic episodes over there, and you guys have already seen the first episode of the year over on the Ransom Letter Publishing YouTube channel. Additionally, if you want more high strangeness from Midnight in Kentucky, check out the Midnight in Kentucky Patreon at patreon.com/Midnight in Kentucky for several different spin-off series from the original MIK, as well as exclusive merch and content. And me and John just recorded a hell of an After Midnight for the Patreon.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see how everybody thinks about that.
Yes. But you know, it kicks off with some pretty cool stories of some wild shit that's happened to us lately.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then it ends with us losing our entire fan base.
Like Ben, you've completely screwed up bringing this guy on here.
Shut it down. Shut it all down. But you're hearing him right now. Tonight's co-host is someone whose music and voice you have heard on the show before. Someone who is a longtime friend of mine and someone who I've discussed weird things with pretty much non-stop since I've known him. Under this full moon this evening is Mr. John Swanson. Thank you so much for being here, man.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Give us a little introduction to what you do. You do a lot of stuff. Run it down for us.
With you, we have unusual encounters. We're always writing new stuff and working on it.
Absolutely.
I have my personal John Swanson music page, where it's just me doing acoustic stuff, and other than that, I'm here to talk weird shit.
Here to talk weird shit. But you've been on the show a couple times.
Yes,
you did. I think we talked about this on the Patreon. We did tonight. You did the first Halloween episode.
Yeah. And
talked about some experiences down at the dock under the name of Tony.
Tony.
Good old Tony. And then you did this. I think you've done all 3 Halloween episodes, haven't you?
I think so.
Thus far? Yeah. Yeah. So a lifelong experiencer of strange things.
Very much so. Like I said, I lived up in Maine for the first half of my life. I should say the first third of my life.
Right.
And started there as a kid and only got more and more after I moved down here.
Has it?
Especially once I hit Somerset, I'm telling you.
Yeah.
Like you said, there's a reason people call that place weird.
For sure. Actually, if you listen to the Patreon that we did tonight, you can hear a lot of the stories that have happened to you recently about some strange stuff that's going on.
Yeah, and that's just been the last
couple weeks. Yeah, in the last month. So, as always, if you guys are interested in the Patreon, there's a lot going on over there. Check that out. But tonight on the main stream, see what I did there with stream and what we're talking about? On the main stream, we are talking about Kentucky's resident water monsters. And I'll be real with you, man. When I started out doing research on these, I was like, maybe there's going to be 2 or 3. I now have a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 water monsters that we're talking about this evening.
Which is crazy because, I've heard, Bigfoot and all that stuff, stories, but you never hear about Kentucky lake monsters.
Right, absolutely.
Until that one buddy of mine was telling you about.
Yeah, tell that story. I had completely forgotten the story.
When I was security down at Grider Hill, there was a guy there, old redneck fella, which cracked me up because he had I believe it was a 1974, he said, a 3-tier houseboat.
Right.
And this thing looked every bit of 1974. He was working on it, but he was always doing some odd things. But it cracked me up because he's on what they called Millionaire's Row, right in the middle of all of these like $350,000, $400,000 boats. Yeah, but he didn't give a shit, man. He didn't, and he'd come down in the middle of the week sometimes, so he didn't have to mess with the people during the weekend. Right. And I'd go doing my rounds, and I'd see him out there, and I'd sit there and talk to him and all that, and he used to crack me up with some of his stories. But he was talking about, fish.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about fishing and stuff, and he said that there's something in this water, he said, that's huge. Yeah. He said that one day he was fishing, and they were pretty much finishing up, bringing all their stuff in, and he had one line still in the water as he was pulling the others, and he said it was a marlin rod with marlin line for the stripers and stuff.
Which is some pretty strong shit.
Yeah. And something hit it, and he went over. It was in one of the lines, one of the rods holders there on the boat. Right. And it had the thing just bent over. And this thing was so strong that it actually moved the front of the houseboat, like turned it.
Jeez.
He said it was very much like something you'd see on Jaws, like the movie and stuff. He said, but shortly after it did that, it snapped that marlin line. Whatever it was so big. And he said he won't let his kids or grandkids swim in the lake anymore.
Yeah, I can imagine.
He said he'd caught a lot of giant fish off that lake.
Right.
But nothing.
Whatever this was.
Yeah, whatever it was bigger than anything he'd ever.
So this was Lake Cumberland, right?
Yeah.
So that actually kind of brings up something interesting. Did an interview. We talked a little bit about this, I think, maybe on the Patreon. Did an interview with Elijah Henderson from the Cryptid Studies Institute. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that he noted about dogmen sightings is that they're usually on land that is contested or that has some unnatural history, right? Mm-hmm. Lake Cumberland, very much one of those places. The cities were drowned, the graves were drowned out. A lot of these that we're going to talk about tonight are man-made lakes that the exact same shit has happened in. Yep. So, but that's interesting. And, we hear a lot of stories, and we're going to talk about this later, too, about these catfish or these fish that are fucking massive.
Oh, yeah.
And we hear about that all the time, whether it's in the Ohio River or in Lake Cumberland or wherever. And, I mean, that's just as much a monster as anything else, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so...
When I moved down here, we lived in the Daniel Boone National Forest, and if you were to walk straight through our backyard, it drops straight off into Buck Creek.
Yeah.
And my grandmother was telling me that back in like the 70s or 80s or something like that, because people would literally just push their cars off these cliffs down into the creek.
Oh, yeah.
And, of course, it says a creek, but it's extremely deep and wide.
Right.
But somebody, like, trying to do an article on, like, the water pollution, stuff like that, sent a diver down there to take pictures of, like, I mean, there's Volkswagens and stuff down in there. And, I guess the guy seen a big shadow, and when he turned around, when he was turned around in the water there was a catfish bigger than, I say Volkswagen because it's what it said.
Right.
That it was bigger than the Volkswagen there, and he swam to the top, got out of the water, and he said he wouldn't go down there anymore.
Dude.
He said this thing could have swallowed a manhole.
I feel like I have heard that story. You may have told me that story.
May have, yeah. That was one of the first things my grandmother told me when we cut there, because we lived right there. We could just go down the steps down to the creek. So she's like, "Oh yeah, there's huge fish down there and stuff." Yeah.
So Buck Creek is that whole area. And I mean, you and I have talked about this, but Steven and I have talked about this on the show before. That whole area is fucking notorious for paranormal shit. Oh, yeah. Right? Yeah. And I mean, specifically the Pennyroyal shit. Mm-hmm. They talk about that area a lot in that. But, in thinking that way, I re-listened to the first season of Pennyroyal before the second one came out. And Dan talks about the salamanders that used to be at Dandyland that have completely gone away now. That were those massive salamanders. Do you remember him saying anything about that?
I don't remember if I remember that or not.
But that's interesting, because what if those animals had been there, forever, and they've slowly just died out, and now that's one of the only ones that's left?
Well, it's funny you said that. I didn't call it a salamander. Mm-hmm. But me and my ex-brother-in-law, we were fishing off of Buck Creek there. Uh-huh. It's actually a stream, I guess, that came off of Buck Creek.
Right.
And we weren't getting anything, and I'd always heard that was a really good fishing spot. Well, all of a sudden, my line started going crazy. I'm like, oh, all right, great, finally. So I'm reeling this thing in, and I noticed it's coming at me. This thing was, I finally had a neighbor that told me it was called a mud dog.
I've heard of these,
but it looks like a giant salamander.
Yeah.
And this thing crawled right up onto the shore.
Yeah.
And, I didn't know what it was, so I'm sitting there taking the line, picking up, slamming it on rocks and stuff.
That would be terrifying, man.
Yeah, so it has, teeth and everything.
Yeah.
And so we finally got it in a bucket and brought it home, and I had it covered on my front porch, waiting for my dad to get home.
One of these guys?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
they are vicious.
it was sitting there snapping and stuff like that in there, and finally my neighbor, he come over and he said, "What you got there?" I said, "Well, to be honest, I don't know.
I have no idea."
And so he kind of looked at it, and he goes, "Oh, that's one of them old nasty mud dogs." He goes, "I bet you didn't catch any fish, did you?" I said, "No." I said, "That's what I thought this was." We'd sit there for like 2 hours and nothing. And then all of a sudden, I got this. He's like, "Yeah." He goes, "There won't be fish anywhere near around it."
Right.
But if you look at that, though, that's what it looks like, is a giant salamander.
Oh, dude, 100%. And, what if one of those things got 6 feet long, 7 feet long? That'd be fucking terrifying. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And with all the stuff that's been put in, like, say, Buck Creek, let alone, like, a big lake like Cumberland.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the Ohio River and all of those that we're going to talk about tonight. So tonight we're talking about water monsters and all the things that live in the many waterways around Kentucky. These first two that we're going to talk about, I first discovered the Harry the Herrington Monster and the Calk Lake Monster on the Beast of the Bluegrass poster I picked up from the International Paranormal Museum that was designed by Caitlin Bullock, and I'll include that in the show notes. Very cool poster, and we always want to give them love. And a lot of the research I've done this evening come from Cryptozoocity and their article Lake Monsters in Kentucky, which I'll include in the show notes, and also from Teresa's Haunted History of the Tri-State and their article, Kentucky's Lake Monsters. So, first water monster of this evening goes by the name Herry and is in the Herrington Lake. Herry the Herrington Lake Monster. This is his story.
Doesn't sound quite vicious, though.
He doesn't. Like he sounds like a nice little, like you could just pat him on the head. And, yeah. Harrington Lake is an artificial lake located in Mercer, Garrett, and Bull counties in Kentucky. In 1925, when Kentucky Utilities implemented plans to build a dam by flooding the Dix River, the creation of Harrington Lake soon followed. At the time, the dam was the largest earth-filled dam in the world, and Harrington Lake would become the deepest lake in Kentucky with a depth of 249 feet. Immediately after its creation, people in the area and visitors to Harrington Lake began reporting an unusual aquatic-dwelling creature that supposedly resembled an eel pig, with, just as it sounds, the body of an eel and the head, snout, and curly tail of a pig. The Herrington Lake Monster, or Harry, as he has become known, is described as being roughly 15 feet in length, with a skin tone similar to that of a speckled fish and moving very quickly, sometimes as fast as a boat. Though sightings of the creature began as early as the dam's completion in the early and mid-20s, it is the encounters reported by University of Kentucky professor Lawrence S. Thompson in 1972 that brought Harry's name to the annals of cryptozoological research. Thompson, whose lake home sat on the shores of Lake Harrington, said he had seen the creature an uncounted number of times, and that after this many encounters, still could not determine Harry's species. In an interview with the Louisville Courier, the professor is quoted as having said, "It's only a monster in the sense that one would call an alligator a monster if they had never seen one before." Theories range from the building of the Dix Dam having opened a passage into an underground cave system, whereby mysterious eel pig species emerged into Lake Harrington, or Harry being a prehistoric remnant which gained access to Harrington Lake after being trapped when the dam was built, to more mundane explanations such as oversized alligator gar or an out-of-place alligator itself. Though there have been more recent encounters with Harry, none have been so prolific as Thompson's in the early 70s, and the identity of the creature remains to be discovered over 95 years later.
So that's Harry.
Harry.
And before we go too much further, I just want to note that I found a lot of that information from the Pine Barrens Institute and their cryptid profile on Harry, the Herrington Monster. Pine Barrens Institute is an awesome site, got a lot of information, do a lot of good research, so I want to give them a shout out. But something I want to throw out real quick that we mentioned when we tried to record this last week and the computer shut the fuck down on us, is the description of Harry is generally as a pig, right? Pig snout, pig ears, pigtail. But that's the image. I showed them to you before we started.
That, to me, looks like a Japanese dragon.
100%.
Yes. I told you we watch a lot of Ink Master.
Yep.
And the one guy, Nunez, is very known for that. So every time they do one, he critiques it real hard. And as soon as you showed me that, it looked like a drawing of what somebody would have been doing a tattoo of.
Absolutely.
As a dragon.
Absolutely. And as someone who lived in Kentucky in the early 20s to the early 30s to the 70s, I mean, what did you describe a dragon as? What would that look like to you? A pig with a big long snout and pointy ears? I mean, that sounds like like a pig in a lot of ways. Or at least I think one who lived in this environment at the time would probably describe something.
Right,
like
yeah,
that, you know what I mean?
yeah.
What I think is the most interesting about this is Professor Lawrence Thompson's encounters with this thing. I mean, apparently he saw it a decent amount of times. And the Louisville Courier has him quoting, and I love this quote, "It's only a monster in the sense that one would call an alligator a monster if they had never seen it before."
Right. That sounds to me like a very benign creature that, because it is so much different than anything anybody's expecting or used to,
right?
Of course, it's a monster,
right. Yeah, and, it kind of calls into question, the most famous of lake monsters, Nessie. Mm-hmm. You hear a lot of reports of encounters with Nessie being very benign, very benevolent. I'm not sure, and if anybody's hearing this that has them, I would love to read them. I'm not sure there's ever been a dangerous encounter with Nessie. I don't think I've ever heard of that before. No. But, there's a long history of dark magic being associated with that whole fucking area. Crowley bought the Boleskine house there and did all those workings. And then I think Jimmy Page bought it in the 70s, the guitarist for Led Zeppelin. And that shit fucked his life up. So, even though, because, again, Harrington Lake is an artificial lake. We're out there back to contested land, people being run out to build this thing, whatever. Even though it may have been summoned somehow by this thing, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a malevolent thing. You know what I mean? Yeah. And, I mean, that's a pretty far jump. I'm just saying, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's an evil creature.
Right.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting that this guy saw it so much. And he was a professor for the University of Kentucky. And he was trusted enough that the Louisville Courier interviewed him several times on seeing the thing. You know what I mean?
It's not like Jim Bob seeing it down at the creek or something.
Yeah. Which we got plenty of those reports.
Well, yeah.
But, I mean, this dude, had a house there, had the prime set up for viewing it. Which then, again, also makes me wonder why there are no photos of it. You know what I mean?
You would think.
That's a little odd. But
when was he supposedly doing this?
This was he came to public with encounters in 1972. 1972.
I mean, you would have thought there would have been
some photos or something.
Yeah.
If he sees it that often, there would be
yeah.
some. But, I mean, maybe there are. Maybe somebody out there listening has some photos of the Herrington Lake Monster, and we would love to see those. Please send those to us.
No kidding.
So, going on, that's Harry. He is an eel pig. Very interesting little creature. Actually, he may be the title card of the episode because he's a pretty cool looking guy. But next, we have the Calk Lake Monster. And this is in Calk Lake in Mount Sterling in Montgomery County. And I first learned about this guy from Gateway Ghosts and Other Local Legends by Lori and Ron Coffey. And both of them are pretty amazing researchers who do all kinds of stuff in that direction. But Mount Sterling.
I know a little bit about Mount Sterling.
Interesting place.
Yeah,
Interesting place. And Ron actually goes into a lot of... The whole gateway in that title, Gateway Ghosts and Other Legends, is the gateway to the Appalachians. So that's the Mount Sterling and all of that area. But so, this is the story of the Sid Calk Lake Monster.
Sid Calk Lake in Mount Sterling, Kentucky is a private fishing lake named for Sidney Johnson Calk, a now deceased local resident who passed away at the age of 85 in October 1975, presumably peacefully and naturally and not as a result of a lake monster attack. However, the lake that bears his name was the site of at least 3 water monster encounters in the late 60s that became somewhat dangerous to those involved. Those 3 most widely known sightings occurred in the summer of 1967. The first incident occurred when a boat carrying 3 night fishermen became entangled in some debris. One of the fishermen jumped out of the boat to help free the jam, but when he stood up on a submerged log, it quickly uncoiled, splashed, and swam away. In the full moon's light, the 3 of them saw a serpent-like creature as big as a telephone pole. A few days after this incident, another fisherman was excitedly reeling in a large bass when what he described as a snake with a head as big around as a trash can chomped down on his catch, ripping it from the line, and made off with it. Later that summer, a young boy spotted what he believed to be the creature, saying it was as long as a house and as big around as a man. Though sparse reports continue, sightings of the creature never quite reached the height of the summer of 67.
That one kind of, though, I mean, if you think about a giant catfish,
100%.
a lot of those, I think, could be confused with like a giant serpent, especially with the way you describe the mouth.
Yeah.
Being as open like a trash can. I mean, you see, they open that mouth up, you know, and I mean, inhale basically everything.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's kind of what I was thinking with this one. This one could very likely be an oversized catfish, an oversized snake, something natural but not natural, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And this kind of brings to mind that whole idea of, you know, I hear a lot of people say, talking about Kentucky forests, I wouldn't go into the Kentucky forest without a gun. I don't know how many people I've heard say that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of the same way with our lakes and rivers, right? Like any lake or river we have, people are like, just be careful. There's weird shit out there or underneath it.
Yep.
And I mean, it's very much this case. And I don't know, is that every lake and river, or is there something special about Kentucky that there is something in these things that we need to watch out for?
Well, man, like Kentucky, I mean, listen to Hunter S. Thompson. Kentucky is a weird place.
That's a very good point. 100%. 100%.
But yeah, I mean, I would naturally think, you know, lend towards the, you know, giant catfish type thing. But, I mean, with the depths of these lakes, who would know?
Yeah. And this story kind of sounds like the story that you tell about the 3-story deck guy on Millionaires Row, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, the thing is ripping their catch out of their, and I mean, it sounds like very similar to that. So,
Yep.
One of the things, though, I wanted to note before we moved on from the Cold Lake Monster, like I said, Ron Coffey and Lori Coffey, his wife, are the ones who wrote about this, and where I found out about it, it's in Gateway Ghosts and Other Local Legends. He also mentions, and this is an episode Stephen and I did a while back, in that book about the Gateway Werewolf, and that's a whole other side of this. So this creature, the Sidcalk Lake creature, exists right alongside the Gateway Werewolf and all of these werewolf creatures that are running around in the area.
Right, yeah.
And there's also, I think this may have come from Aliens in Kentucky, the story of the white-furred werewolf that would like abduct Native American children and take them up literally on Mount Sterling and be taken away in their ships of light.
Wow.
So this whole area has some weird shit, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And it seems like the large catfish or the large serpent things are right at home with that. It's kind of like the black cats that people see on land, you know? People see these large black cats. It's almost like large animals are associated with this phenomenon.
Right, yeah.
Whether it's large catfish or large cats or whatever.
Well, down at the dock, when I was at State Dock, that howling.
Yeah,
across,
exactly.
You know, yeah.
Exactly. And then the dire wolf-like thing that you saw with the thing when its throat ripped out. Yeah. I mean, that's very much a large fucking animal, right?
Yep.
And I don't know what it is, but it does seem like large versions of creatures keep showing up. Like creatures that are too big for their size or too big. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. I don't know why that is, but it's very much what we're looking at here, you know? So now we're moving on to Rockcastle County for the Lake Linville Monster. Lake Linville Monster. And this one gets decently weird.
Lake Linville in Rockcastle County, Kentucky, is a man-made lake that was created as the result of the creation of the Renfrew Dam in 1968. The maximum depth of Lake Linville is only 36 feet, with an average of 16 feet. Though documented reports are sparse, the Lake Linville Monster has become the stuff of legend in the community around the lake. Unfortunately, some of the best information on the creature came from the now-defunct Topics local community message board website. One of the most notable posts on the Lake Linville Monster came in 2008, when one member said it would be the best if everyone stayed away from the lake, and relayed a personal incident with the creature. One evening, while canoeing, they claimed, a large blue-green snake-like creature, head the size of a basketball, attacked his vessel, snapping it in half and leaving him for dead in the water. Though many questioned the validity of the poster's claims, many more came forward with their own accounts of encountering something in Lake Linville. One of the most profound, if not probably one of the most embellished incidents with the Lake Linville Monster came from a poster claiming to be a resident of the area who was a little girl at the time of the lake's creation. Her story reads:
One afternoon, we decided to take a hike in the woods after our picnic, and we had been gone for about an hour when we heard the helicopters. There were 3 of them, and one was huge, the size of an army helicopter or something. We stayed in the woods and watched as men with guns got out. Mom was afraid and made us all hide. The next thing I knew, a large crate big enough to hold a car was brought off of one of the helicopters. Then 6 men with guns who were wearing black masks opened it. I was astounded and almost screamed as a huge black snail-looking thing came out. It seemed to be looking at the men, and one of the men yelled, "Go!" real loud, and then the thing swished into the water. The men went back to the helicopter where 2 more crates were taken off and 2 more of the slug-like animals were let go. All of a sudden, the men with the guns began to back up, and we saw that one of the giant snail-like things was scooting towards them. That's when we heard the shots.
So, Lake Linville Monster, Rockcastle County. What I think is so interesting about this one is that Lake Linville is only 36 feet deep.
Yeah.
And only 16 feet at average.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One thing I wonder, though, is like, how big of a vessel was he in if a creature has a head the size of a basketball was able to bite it in half?
That's a good point.
That's not exactly a big circumference.
Yeah.
You know?
That's a very, very good point. One of the things that, you know, I think is interesting here, and Stephen talked about this when it happened, is when we were doing research, topics was a huge source of information for that. Because everybody went on there, and I mean, admittedly, it could be a bunch of fucking bullshit. All of it's subjective. You know, you got to decide who you're going to believe, what you're going to take in as truthful, whatever. But if I'm thinking correctly, and I need to ask Steven to be sure, I don't even think you can access that from the Wayback Machine anymore. Like, you can't even go back and look at those posts. They have completely shut that shit down. So it's almost in a way like they were trying to get rid of records.
Something.
Yeah. And there was so much, man. There were all of these stories about different counties and how people's dogs would disappear, and people would get on there and talk about this, and then they talk about the UFOs that were being seen, and this Lake Linville and all these monsters and stuff. And then topics just stopped. And you can't even access the shit anymore. You can't even go back and look. But with that being said, I don't know about this whole fucking crazy story.
You'd think, though, if this woman remembered this from as a kid, she would have been telling this story all along rather than going, oh, yeah, I remember when I was a kid, I seen this.
Right.
You would have thought more people would have heard this story.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah.
But, you know, there is kind of something to be said for all of these dams being built and all of these fucking lakes.
Yeah.
And every one of them having some type of creature in them. It's almost like, I don't know. I mean, this is get real fucking weird with it. It's almost like if this story were true, and I mean, even if this story is not true, all of these man-made lakes we talked about tonight have had some type of creature in them, right? Yeah. It's almost like they made these things to house these creatures in a lot of way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Or at least when they did make it, it gave somewhere for these creatures to hide.
Right. Exactly. And that's a good question. You know, which way is it? Did they make them and then the creatures came, or were the creatures there and then they made the lake? You know what I mean? And then they got into it. So, I don't know. It's a good question. But that was the Lake Linville Monster in Rockcastle County. Now, we're moving on to somebody who we've talked about on the show quite a bit, Mr. Barton Noonly, and his amazing book, Mysterious Kentucky. Hoping to get Barton on the show soon, do an interview with him, talk to him about his journeys, his travels, his studies, all of that. But Barton talks about a creature in his book, and there's not, compared to the other stuff, I mean, there's a lot of information in this book. It's, you know, cryptids, UFOs, all that stuff. Right. So compared to the other stuff, there's not a lot about sea monsters or about lake monsters in here. But one of the interesting ones goes by the name Jenny, the Geneva Monster.
Chronicled and influential Kentucky high strangeness experiencer and investigator Barton Noonly's deep-diving 2007 compendium of supernatural and paranormal encounters in the Bluegrass, Mysterious Kentucky, Jenny, the Geneva Monster, as she has been termed by Noonly and those who have seen her, is described as a Nessie-like sea serpent creature, having a bill like that of a duck. Jenny is said to inhabit the waters of the Ohio River in and around Henderson, Kentucky, especially in the Geneva River bottoms portion of the Slough's Wildlife Management Area. It would be in this area on a bright morning in the late 80s that two local boys who supposedly witnessed Jenny making her way up the Ohio River. The pair, given the monikers Andy A. and Mike B. by Noonly in Mysterious Kentucky, had been driven to the remote portion of the Geneva River bottoms by Mike's father, who remained in the car reading the newspaper while the boys got in some target practice with a small .22 pistol by shooting turtles off of logs. When Andy noticed something bobbing up out of the water, however, the two stopped shooting and turned their attention to whatever mysterious creature was now rising from the depths of the river. As the boys watched the movement, 5 separate humps rose from the water close together, one after the next, and appeared to have lizard skin. Next, an elongated neck with a serpent-like head, affixed with a snake-like snout and dark eyes, shockingly rose from the waters ahead of the humps. Upon seeing the witnesses on the shoreline, the boys described the creature surging forward and disappearing into the muddy river. The entire incident lasted only 10 to 15 seconds. When Noonly interviewed Andy in '99, he described the creature as being over 35 feet long, and the investigator found him to be very credible, and this credibility was further backed up for Noonly when he again interviewed Andy in 2005, when the witness provided the same details as his first report. When asked why the boys didn't fire on the creature, Andy told Noonly that the sheer size of the thing and the belief it could have swallowed them both whole had it wanted dissuaded both the boys from acting aggressively toward the creature. Mike, as with many witnesses to the strange and unusual, has refused to discuss the incident from the beginning. This would not be the only sighting of Jenny, however, with Barton detailing a 2001 sighting of the creature by one James Kennedy during a 4th of July campout. Kennedy described a much smaller creature than that described by Andy and Mike, appearing to be only around 3 feet long, but with a beak like a duck and swimming with its head raised from the water. Though around the size of residential snakes, Kennedy feels assured that this was no snake, due to its movements in the water and its appearance. Additionally, the sighting was much longer than the 10 to 15 seconds reported by Andy and Mike, with James reportedly watching the creature for as long as 2 hours as it swam in shallow waters only 3 to 4 feet from the shore. The sighting took place within 2 miles of Andy and Mike's original report. Noonly himself reports having seen a similar type of creature on at least 2 occasions, one sighting of which was in the company of other witnesses in the Ohio River around 20 miles away from the Slows Wildlife Management Area in the Stanley area of Daviess County, Kentucky. Noonly says, though his sighting was at a greater distance than that of the other witnesses, around 50 feet, it appeared to be the same type of specimen with a serpentine-like body and face and a bill like a duck. Though smaller than Andy and Mike's sighting, the creature seen by Noonly was around the size of a man's forearm jutting from the water, and Barton believes it may have been a juvenile, though not as young as that seen by Kennedy.
So, these 2 kids are down by the river doing some fishing. Got this .22 caliber pistol, shooting turtles off logs.
Real nice kids.
Real nice kids. Yeah, shooting turtles off logs. Great kids. And their dad drove them, of all shit. So their dad's like, yeah, go shoot some turtles off logs. But, so they're down there, and they notice these humps. Very much the classic Nessie fucking humps.
Yeah.
Floating through the water. And they think it's tires tied together at first. Till the fucking head pops out of the water and looks at them and is like, the fuck you doing in my river? And Barton asks them, he's like, why didn't you shoot at it? And they're very much, an answer we've heard again and again. We were so shocked that we didn't even think about pulling the gun. You know what I mean?
Well, of course, if they're 22 and stuff, and this said it was several hundred yards.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty good long shot
for a 22, especially.
Yeah,
100%. And he mentions here that he's interviewed them plenty of times. Plenty of, like, he's interviewed them, and their story always just stays the same. Everything's so obviously they saw something.
Yeah, they definitely seen something.
But it's interesting that the Geneva River bottoms hook up with the Ohio River. And all of this is in the Slows Wildlife Management Area of Henderson County. And, dude, Henderson County, from this book and Barton's other books, is full of this shit. Yeah. It's water monsters and inhumanoids and Sasquatches and dogmen and, like, everywhere. Right. Everywhere. So there's some type of portal opens. I go back to the interdimensional thing a lot. Maybe that's not what it is. But some type of large creature in the river.
Well, you and I were talking the last time we tried to record this.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of energy is made when they start flooding these towns and these buildings that have held all this energy for years of people coming in, and all of a sudden that's just completely obliterated. It's all that's gone. That energy is stuck. Like, Lord only knows what that could do.
Right. And what that's dredging up from the, you know.
They say change in anything, whether it's a change in, like, if somebody has more ghostly encounters when they start doing renovations to a house.
Yes.
What about a complete town getting wiped off? You know, that's a lot of energy right there.
All of those people being pushed out of their homes, all those graveyards being flooded. Yeah, all of that. Yeah. What happens with that? Interestingly enough, that brings us to a river that I'm decently familiar with and have fished on a couple times. And I mean, shit, you live in this area. The Green River.
Yeah.
And the Green River Sea Monster.
I had never heard of that one.
Yeah. So, Green River, Bowling Green, Warren County, Columbia. I didn't know this. Barton Noonly also told me this. The Green River is the second deepest river in the world.
Damn.
Second only to the Amazon River.
Man.
Right? And that's in Kentucky. That's literally like right down the road. I fished on that motherfucker.
Yeah, I have too.
Yeah. Long stretches of the Green River are considered to be bottomless, and it is the only north-flowing river in America.
Really? See, that doesn't. I don't think that's right. The reason I say this is because when I lived in Maine, we were on we took a canoe trip with our church up the Allagash River waterway.
Yeah.
Okay, and from what I was told, because it flows north up into Canada. We canoed it all the way up into Canada.
Interesting.
And we were told that it is the largest river to flow north in this part of the hemisphere other than the Amazon. So it wasn't deep, but it was like, I mean, we were doing class 4 and 5 rapids on this thing. So it was a very large, thing. And it went north from the top of Maine up into Canada.
Did the waters flow north?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We canoed it up because we had to canoe across 2 great big lakes first until we got to the entryway. And then once you start, it goes up, and because they dropped us off, and then other people from our church drove the vehicles and all that up into Canada.
And then picked us up. That's crazy. That's crazy. It's crazy so
I don't think that's correct as far as like being the only one. Might be the deepest one. Yeah.
Anybody who knows about that, hit us up. Let us know. Honestly, it could be wrong. I mean, a lot of researchers get wrong shit.
Well, I mean, the Allagash River waterway. That's up in the very top of Maine into Canada.
Yeah, for sure.
A lot of people probably wouldn't even know about it.
Maybe it's the longest running that is only in the United States.
Maybe, I don't know. Like I said,
whoever knows, hit us up. Let us know. That is interesting, though. I mean, that's a good call. But so this article, and this is the only instance I can. Actually, it's not the only instance. Well, we'll get there. This is the only instance I could find of this creature being reported. But it is interesting because the Green River goes into a lot of crazy shit. It's an article called "Sea Monster Reported in Green River." And it's from way back when in Warren County. It's compiled by researchers at the Warren County Public Library and appears twice weekly in the Bowling Green Daily News.
On December 9th, 1941, the Daily News reported a sighting of the sea monster of the Green River near Warren County by J.J. Potter of Parish Mill. Potter claimed he had the monster in his net, but it thrashed about until it tore the net and got loose. Jack Malone, a Brownsville newspaperman who had been following the sea monster story, also reported a possible attempt to dynamite the monster. However, he couldn't find anyone to verify the account. He conceded that anyone would be reluctant to admit that he had dynamited the river.
And that's the whole story on that. But it's interesting because I found this, and I found this story right after I had come back from Crypticon, and there was a guy there by the name of Zach Bells who Jamie and I talked a little bit about on the last episode. But he's a researcher from Somerset, really cool guy. He has a whole story about this encounter with what he calls the Green River Monster. But his story is a Sasquatch-like creature.
I think you and I have talked about that, yeah.
He was camping on the shore there, and it was right outside his tent, and it screamed at him. And, like, said the roar was, I'm hoping to get him on the show as well, doing an interview. But, same place, right there, Green River Monster. And, again, that story sounds very much like that story you told us at the top of the show. Yep. With, another instance of this thing pulling down these fishermen and, Yeah, so the Green River.
I'll have to ask my wife about that, see if she's heard anything about that.
Absolutely. See if, Interesting, though, because the Green River has a whole lineage of weird shit with it, and now it has this. And that's another one of those places in Kentucky that they talk about large fish and large snakes and all that shit.
Yeah. You have a, just a bottomless thing.
Exactly.
Whatever. What else is in there? Yeah.
And that's the thing with rivers and lakes and oceans and seas, right? Like, it's almost like space. Like, we will probably never be able to go that deep, or a normal person would not be able to go that deep or stay that long. So it's not like we can explore every piece of it to find out what's down there.
Right. Yeah. So,
who the fuck?
It's like the ocean.
Exactly. Yeah. The next one kind of connects back to Jenny the Geneva Monster.
The Ohio River flows through an area of Evansville, Indiana called Dogtown, which lays just across the water from Henderson, Kentucky. On August 21st, 1955, the very same day as the infamous Hopkinsville alien invasion, something just as strange was reaching up from the dredges of the Ohio in an attempt to pull down one Dogtown resident. Naomi Johnson, along with her 3 children and friend Louise Lamble, had sought the river's cool water that day as a way of escaping the summer's pressing heat, which was hitting up to 95. Only around 15 feet deep in the Evansville area and moving around a mile an hour, the Ohio seemed like a paradise. That is, until Naomi was calmly paddling about 15 feet out from where her children sat with Louise, who was sunbathing on the shoreline, when suddenly the peace was shattered when something wrapped itself around Johnson's knee. Naomi responded by splashing hard and attempting to escape the grasp of the mystery assailer, which she would later describe as hairy and claw-like. Naomi's struggle almost proved to be unsuccessful when she was pulled under by the aquatic attacker. Johnson, however, underwater now and being pulled ever deeper, did manage to kick away from whatever was dragging her to the depths and bob back to the surface, where she was able to let out a scream before she was grabbed again. Luckily, Johnson grabbed a nearby inner tube and climbed aboard, escaping the mysterious grasp and making it to her friend and children on the shore. Despite being shaken, Naomi was safe, being treated for simple cuts and bruises when medical help arrived following a call to authorities from an unknown source. Medics did draw attention to a strange abrasion on Johnson's knee at the spot she was supposedly grabbed. On her leg was a strange blue-green stain, the size and shape of a large handprint, that could not be removed and remained on Naomi's knee for several days following the incident.
That's the story of the Evansville lagoon creature.
Well, I'll say something about this. Mm-hmm. Like, of course, she supposedly had like marks on her and stuff. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. When I lived in Maine, we lived off of a Pushaw Lake, and certain areas, you might have, grass from the bottom of the lake, and like sometimes that would. If you're swimming, it would wrap around your leg. Yeah. And if you start to swim off, you feel that on you. You could think something is
grabbing you and pulling you down.
But she said this wasn't very deep, though, didn't she?
Yeah, only like 16 feet, I think, maybe. But And what's interesting about that is it also like grabbed her further up she got too.
Yeah.
So it would have grabbed her on the bottom, and then as she got further to the surface, it was still trying to grab her, and maybe did grab her. But that's exactly what I thought the first time I heard the story. It's like, well, it was seaweed or it was water. But then you know, started to think about it, and I was like, well, if she's getting closer to the surface, then, but still could be. I mean, it absolutely could be.
But I mean, if it left actual marks over days.
Apparently, there are no photos of that. I thought for sure there were photos of that shit. I'm gonna keep doing some digging and see if I can find photos, because I remember seeing photos of the hand on her leg. But regardless, so apparently there were marks. The most interesting thing about this case, though, and the reason that I brought it up and that I want to talk about it in here is it is a pretty big case. It's talked a lot about in these circles. But what is so interesting about it is it was literally the day before the Hopkinsville Goblin encounter.
Man.
And it's right there across the Ohio River. So, that's an interesting little synchronicity. You know what I mean?
Maybe those goblins coming up from the bottom.
Coming up out of the water.
Water, yeah.
Yeah. Dude, that's a good point. Maybe they didn't hide in the caves. Maybe they were hiding under the water.
Yeah.
Fuck. Yeah. So that's, I mean, I don't know. I've always thought that was an interesting little part of that thing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, especially that close together.
Yeah. Literally the day before.
Yeah.
So, or maybe it was the same day. I'm not sure. I'll have to do
And those areas
research.
are close together, you said?
They're decently close together. Let me see. I'm gonna do some maps here. Evansville. So they're about a 1 hour drive from each other.
Yeah.
But right there in Hopkinsville, there's Henderson County right there, which was where we were talking about with Jenny before. Mm-hmm. And the Ohio River runs right across the border right there on Evansville. So you're right there in Evansville, and the Ohio River is literally right there. So decently close. But again, day before. Wild shit. But
if it's a coincidence, it's a mighty good one.
How many coincidences are too
many?
So finally tonight, we have the old standby man-sized catfish. Plus giant turtles and alligator gar. We're kind of lumping all these things together. But there is an article called Sea Monsters in Kentucky Living. I'll include it in the show notes. I just want to read 2 little paragraphs from this mamma jamma here real quick. Hang around any school of anglers long enough and eventually you'll hear about the monster catfish. The tale, usually told around the campfire, claims a diver performing an underwater inspection at a nearby dam surfaces, then quits on the spot. The reason? There's a catfish down there as big as a man, and he's afraid of getting swallowed. There is a kernel of truth to this urban legend. In 1999, Owensboro resident Bruce Midkiff wrestled a 4.5-foot long, 104-pound blue catfish from the Ohio River. That wasn't the biggest blue out there either. Several years ago, a commercial fisherman netted a 125-pound blue catfish from Lake Barkley. So, I mean, those are pretty big fucking fish.
Lake Barkley, though.
Yeah.
That's down to where I used to live in Murray. That's down there by the land between the lakes.
Yeah.
It's the lakes down there. And, man, there's all kinds of weird stuff happens down there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, shit, we talked with Elijah about the land between the lakes beast monster on the maybe the next episode after this one, or the last episode, depending. But, there's the whole long history of the again, werewolves and lake monsters. Mm-hmm. Some fucking connection.
Yep.
But, yeah. I didn't know that was Lake Barkley, so that's one of the lakes in the land between the lakes.
I think
Lake
so,
Barkley.
yeah.
Okay.
If I remember right, yeah.
Interesting. And, I thought it was interesting. This kind of connects with the Ohio River and Jenny, right? The Geneva Monster, because these are man-sized catfish, and they're in the Ohio River. I mean, a 104-pound catfish, that's fucking huge. That's like the size of a small child.
Well,
or a decently sized child.
But Creek, where I told you, I used to live there. I did, because you could take stairs down to because, I mean, it was such a steep drop off. I mean, it's just cliffs straight down. So they had made steps down to get to it, and then on the actual river, they had built like a dock type thing. And I was down there fishing one time, and a guy pulls up on his boat that lived there, and he docks his boat, and he asked me if I had any luck. And I said, no. He said, you're on the wrong side. I said, what do you mean? And directly on the other side of the creek there from the dock, little dock that I had made, was like a little cave, water cave that went underneath there. And he showed me a picture of him holding a catfish that he had caught underneath that water cave there.
Right.
And he's holding it with two hands, and he's got it up to his chest, and the tail is just
looping back.
Yeah. I mean, this thing was probably 4 feet long.
Yeah.
I mean, it was probably about that. Yeah.
And again, is that not a fucking lake monster?
Yes.
I mean, that's an unnaturally large fish.
Oh,
that's a lake monster. It may not be any pig-eel type lake monster, but fuck, can you imagine? Like, can you imagine swimming in the lake and seeing that thing?
Well, think about, like, for me in Maine, all right? We have everything up there that you guys have here.
Right.
But because of the temperature, they're on much smaller scales.
Right.
We don't call them catfish, we call them horn-powdered bullhead. And probably the longest one you're going to get is about 1.5 foot long. And that's a good size one.
Sure,
I mean,
yeah.
It's a good, and that's, like I said, that's about as long as you're going to get. And, like, we don't have pike, but we have pickerel.
Okay, yeah.
Which are the same thing, but on a smaller scale. So you figure down here, things are already warmer, but man-made lakes, I found out actually from a lot of the charter fishermen down the dock that they told me about, actually stay warmer. Some of their biggest times, their most popular times for getting business is during the winter because the man-made lakes stay warmer naturally than any of the others. So the fish still bite.
Right.
So you have an already much warmer climate, and then you add a warmer lake than normal with these incredible depths.
Yeah.
Who knows what these things are growing to?
Yeah. Very good point, dude. I didn't know that. That is and I mean, if you're a creature that's looking for somewhere to live, what better place than that?
Oh, yeah.
And they talk about these creatures maybe swimming up through the Ohio River or getting in these lakes somehow. There are plenty of reports of Nessie and those creatures on land. So who's to say that they didn't just walk over there and get in it?
Yeah.
But that kind of concludes our water monster rundown for this evening. This is the part where we deliver our final thoughts, like Jerry Springer. So what's your thoughts, man? What's your thoughts on water monsters in Kentucky? Any validity? You think they're out there?
I think for the most part, what we've heard and read could possibly be explained away.
Yeah, for sure.
But again, like we were just saying, even if this is a natural, say what they keep thinking as a lake monster, say it is just a huge catfish.
Right.
Like I said, with the warmer temperature, the warmer water, the extreme depths, who knows what these things are able to actually grow to.
Right.
We only see a certain level, at a certain depth. But
who knows?
Yeah, who knows?
Who knows? Very good point. Very good point. I think for myself, the water monsters, it's very sparse. You know what I mean? It's a lot like the Pope Lake Monster that we did an episode on a few episodes back. There's a lot of stories of them, but it's hard to pin down exactly who these people were and what their sightings were.
Right.
You know what I mean? And there's so many stories like that in everything we talked about. It was just labeled fishermen or these fishermen, or very rarely that we caught a name. Actually, I think the only actual name we caught was that UK professor Lawrence.
And he's probably dead by now, isn't he?
I don't know. I'm going to do some research.
Check him out.
I mean, if we could get an interview with him.
That was a long time ago, but man, if we could, that'd be
awesome.
badass.
I'm going to look into it. If anybody happens to know Professor Lawrence Thompson or is the family of Lawrence Thompson, if you have talked to him about this, please get in touch with us. Love to talk to you. Love to talk to him.
Talk to him.
That'd be awesome. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
But, I wonder what he saw. I wonder what Harry was. You know what I mean? Because it sounds like, and again, even though we have the absence of photos, sounds like that may have been something different. That doesn't sound like a gar or a catfish. That sounds weird.
A pig face is pretty specific.
Yeah, the snout sounds odd. And there was a couple odd ones. The whole thing, Lake Linville, I think, was the lake where they saw the slugs. Whatever. Yeah. That's a crazy story.
Right, yeah.
But also, it does kind of make you think about these man-made lakes like you were talking about. And it does seem like every one of these has some type of creature in it.
Well, you do hear about, they stalk lakes.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point, man.
What she could have seen is them stalking.
That is a very good point.
Big, large catfish.
Yeah.
And stuff into it as well.
That's a very good point. It could have been a completely misinterpreted.
Yeah.
Or
didn't she say she was a young child too? Didn't she? Yeah.
Or the military is stalking these lakes with some type of fucking creature to feed on.
It's all out to get us.
It's all out to get us, man. Yes. It's there. One thing I was going to say before we go out, though, perhaps. And I'm not willing to say, I don't know about any of these. I honestly don't even know about that encounter because God knows we've heard some pretty crazy shit that has experienced
crazy shit. Yeah,
for sure. So who knows? And hell, if that person is listening tonight, the person that's get in touch with us. We'd love to talk with you for sure. Yeah. Anybody who's seen these type of water monsters, we'd love to talk to you guys. We want to hear your experiences. I'm not willing to go so far on this one, and say that there are water monsters here. Right. Part of me, though, in the symbolism, part of the whole maybe the aliens were the friends we made along the way thing.
Yeah.
Part of me in the symbolism of this is, though, maybe the reason that these places are said to have these water monsters is because they did go through something traumatic. People lost their homes, people lost their places that they love. Mm-hmm. So, maybe even if there isn't a physical water monster there, the area is tainted with fucking aura. And that's why these tales of these creatures come about.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then maybe there's water monsters.
Maybe there's just water monsters, man.
Who knows? It's, dude, one of my favorite X-Files episodes, and you may have seen it, is the episode, I can't remember the name of it. I'll include it in the show notes if I can think of it. But the whole episode, they're looking for this water monster. Scully's dog gets eaten by this thing. It's a whole fucking thing. And they're on the boat at the end of it, and it's the boat shaking back and forth, and they're being attacked by this creature. And then finally they get marooned on this island and it attacks them in the middle of the night. And Mulder shoots it. And it turns out it's this huge alligator. So at the end of the episode, Scully and Mulder are standing there and Scully's like, well, Mulder, guess it got away from you this time. And he's like, yeah, can't all be paranormal or something like that.
Yeah.
And they turn and they walk off. And the camera goes to the lake.
And something.
You see a hump come up.
I do remember that.
And then the head comes up.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh my God, man. That's so good. Because the first time I saw that, I was like, well, shit. Are they just going to do this to us? And then there's the monster.
Remember there was also the one where the guy who, could compress himself down.
Yes.
And all that was. It was yes.
Man, those are so good. So good. Yep. All right, man. Anything else?
I think I'm good, man. I think we got a good, at least started at rational thoughts about it. Yeah.
I don't think the water monsters are done with us. For all of those who have had water monster experiences, get in touch with us. We want to hear from you.
Oh yeah.
If you're looking for MIK merch, check out the TeePublic. I don't think I mentioned that at the beginning of the show. Ransom Letter Publishing TeePublic. You can type that into Google. It'll pop right up there for you. As Jamie mentioned on the last episode, we're working on a Bit Cartel. The Patreon's always open. Got all those spin-off shows, all that exclusive merch. Check that out. Leave us ratings and reviews. Means the world to us. Makes us feel good. Makes us feel like you guys appreciate us. We need to feel appreciated. No, thank you guys so much for listening. We appreciate whatever you do. Don't buy into my bullshit. Just keep listening to the show. We appreciate it. Until the next moon rises, Night Owls. For Midnight in Kentucky, I'm Ben.
I'm John.
Good night.
You've been listening to Midnight in Kentucky,
a Ransom Letter Publishing podcast.
Join us on Twitter and Facebook.
Or get in contact with your questions, comments, or stories of high strangeness
at midnightinkentuckypodcast@gmail.com.